So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and as I'm sure you can see, we are going to be doing the Helm's Deep battle today, and I believe this one will be the last video that I post up in 2018. So I hope you've had a good year, and I hope the year to come will be even better. And this one actually will be, I think, a somewhat lore-friendly battle indeed. All of the attacking armies are going to be three of the different Orc factions, and on the defence we have both Rohan, who obviously are very much at home in Helm's Deep, and also we will have Mirkwood playing alongside them, so rather than Haldir, this time it's going to be Thranduil who has come to the aid of Rohan. We'll go through the attacking armies first of all, I think, because obviously, you know, all of the Orc factions are going to have relatively similar things in mind, maybe a little bit more quantity on the approach, and also then we can go through the defence in a little bit more detail. So first of all, we have Frostlore, who is going to be playing as Isengard, so we have a couple of units of Uruk-hai pikemen, which if they can get set up in position within the fortress itself, they can be incredibly useful. Obviously they can keep the very skillful Mirkwood infantry at bay, and also keep the armour-piercing infantry from Rohan at bay as well. But obviously, you know, getting in position is going to be easier said than done with all of the Rohirrim axe throwers and javelins, and also all of the elven archers, so potentially you'll want to save these until later on if you're on the attackers. Meanwhile, we've also got some Uruk-hai Reavers, which again, AP not likely to be hugely useful in this situation actually. Mirkwood obviously very skillful, so they tend to do very well against sort of the AP troops, which tend to have slightly lower skill, particularly these two-handed axemen from the Orcs. And also Rohan, who tend to have slightly lower armour values than a lot of the other sort of western kingdoms of men. They still do have some armour, of course, but generally speaking they sort of rely on a few other things to keep them alive rather than just their very high armour values. We've got an Isengard catapult here as well, rather than the ballista, so that's an interesting choice, but even so, some siege weaponry on the attacking side is always a good idea on Helm's Deep because of how cramped it can be, and also bringing down that outer wall. Some Uruk-hai Raiders, obviously again, very much the numbers game with regards to this particular unit. You can either bring these or the Dunland veterans, the Uruk-hai Raiders, a little bit more in terms of numbers as well, so trying to go for the overwhelming tactics here, the attackers a little bit. Uruk-hai Berserkers again, now they maybe have an AP focus as well, but they do have multiple HP, and obviously they do have high attack values in general. Even so, they're not going to be ideal against Mirkwood even still. Against some of these sort of basic Rohan units, however, particularly if they get a charge off, they should do very nicely against Rohan spears. Uruk-hai Infantry, of course, which again, solid quality. Again, it's not exactly a good matchup for them if they go up against some of the better Mirkwood infantry, but they should be able to, you know, add a little bit more quality to the front line, because mainly it's going to be coming down to a numbers game here for the Orcs, particularly when you've got elves on the defence. You often have to try and overwhelm them and sort of disrupt their formations a bit. More Reavers, we've also got more infantry and more Raiders. Just over here we've got another unit of infantry, but we also have the mighty champions of the White Hand, which Helm's Deep is a small, cramped environment when you're in there, but there is always the possibility of some cavalry sallying out, and if that is the case, the champions of the White Hand should be able to hunt them down and do massive damage very quickly. I'm not too surprised to see the Trolls of the White Hand either, once again. We see the .96 models, they will be changed in .97 and they look far better. But obviously the Trolls of the White Hand are incredibly strong in a sustained fight, and they should be able to do a lot of damage even to Elven units. Some Uruk-hai archers back here as well as some crossbows, and that's going to round out Isengard's army. So again, nothing too surprising here, a little bit more quality focused than the other two armies I would imagine. Speaking of which, we have Mob Palpatine, who's got some Olag High carrying this one ladder. Trolls have always looked hilarious going up ladders in this game. We've got some Orc Javelins as well. Looks like Mordor have spread themselves out quite a lot. We've got some Morannon Halberds and a Troll Catapult back here. Morannon Halberdiers, again, more Orc Javelins. At the back, we have some Temple Executioners without the armour upgrade, but they're still going to be very, very strong. Again, another unit which can go toe-to-toe with the Elves. The Nazgul, it's not often you'll see the Nazgul doing the grunt work and pushing around, but here they are. Again, another unit which are going to do very well if they can sort of stay with the rest of the main Mordor army, which over here we can see a couple of units of Black Legion, which will be able to push through Elven and Rohan line defences. A couple of units of Sauron's Will as some Morannon Halberds, a lot of Morannon Halberds actually. Again, an AP focus, which is, you know, not hugely cost effective against the two factions that are defending. Some more Orc fodder, and then at the front we have just over there, heading up with the ram, some more Orc fodder, and then we also have some Morannon heavy maulers and some Orc maulers, so again, more AP. And then finally, the final attacking army I believe is the Goblins from the Misty Mountains. Indeed it is, played by new player 195. He's got some Goblin archers here at the front, backed up by some heavy Goblin crossbowmen and archers, so a varied skirmish line. Lots of heavy goblin infantry. Obviously, with the Misty Mountains, you know you're going to be having to deal with a lot of numbers if you're facing off against them. Cave Troll Drummers, just to keep all these low-tier goblins in a line. Heavy Goblin Spears, which, you know, even though the AP is not going to be as useful against the two factions they're up against as it otherwise would be, the Heavy Goblin Spears are still in 0.96, one of the most cost-effective spearmen in the game. They are being changed a little bit in the upcoming 0.97, where they'll be brought more into line with the other Heavy Goblins. They'll still keep their AP, but they won't be as universally good as they are in 0.96, so you will need to be a little bit more careful with them in the future, a little bit more akin to the other goblin units, other basic goblin units anyway. The Black Uruks of the Mountains offer the Misty Mountains a little bit of skill in their lines with a two-handed sword unit. Then some Goblin King Bodyguard and some Blackback Berserkers back here, as well as some Snow Trolls and some White Uruk Fearmongers as well. So, without further ado, let's get into the defending side. And as we phase through the wall, we have Legatus, who is playing as Mirkwood, who sent me the replay. So we've got some Hira Peng and some Megil Erin up here on the wall. They do need to be careful, obviously, because without a doubt, they're going to try and peel down these walls. We've got some Riddermark Axemen as well, which often you're going to see these for Rohan just because they are fairly cheap for what they offer. You know, they offer you that bit of extra AP damage, which could come in very handy when offset with the Elven skill as well. Helmingas as well, obviously the slightly better of the Rohirrim archers. Again, not going to be as good as the Mirkwood archers, obviously, but they're still going to offer you a little bit more ranged firepower here. Some more Riddermark Axemen and some more Helmingas. A lot of Riddermark units as well, so we've got some Riddermark Spears, which should be able to help hold the line with some mass. Some Thandrimi Erin as well, which obviously, again, Elven Spears offsets the Spear Malice quite well. A Rohirrim Catapult and a Mirkwood Ballista, so the Ballista in particular could be very useful for dealing with any catapults that try to enter the fortress. We've got some Westmark Marshals, obviously, again, I've said before, my personal favourite of all the Rohirrim units. Not the most effective, just my personal favourite. But they are still very good. You know, lots of AP damage coming off of them. Some more Thandrimi Erin backed up by some Westmark Spearmen and some Eowyn Shield Maidens. Now this is a very important part of the Rohan army. They inspire the nearby troops around them, and they have their axes which they can throw, which obviously is going to do a lot of damage to the enemy on the approach. And then the secondary, well, the keep, as it were, we have the Hiri Peng up here, as well as some Argue Inanwaith, which I don't know if this is Thranduil's unit. I cannot see him. But down here we have some Hiri Ek guarding the gate. We also have some First Marshal's Bodyguard, which could do a bit of damage, but they need to be real careful of the Trolls and of the Champions of the White Hand, so they're going to have a lot of micro to do here. Hroldolf. We've got some Riddermark Spearmen in here with some Westmark Infantry, so again, these Swordsmen for Rohan, which I haven't seen them as much as I thought I would ever since they've been added, because they've been in the game for quite some time at this point. Westmark Spears, more Westmark Spears, some Hiri Lang as well, which obviously going to be very good against most of the Orcs that they have to come into contact with. Then back here, all of the elites, of course, so we've got some more Hiri Auth, we've got some more Westmark Marshals, the Athalion Inanwaith, which I can only assume Thranduil is in this mass somewhere, the Meduzeld Guard, which obviously, I think their new name in the next patch is the Keepers of the Golden Hall, but obviously fantastic javelins and also very strong in melee as well. And we also have the Hornberg Sentries, which is going to be the Rohan Generals unit. So obviously again, more AP, very, very tough, very strong. And then up here we have some Aradirith Amon Lank as well. So, without further ado, let's begin. And unsurprisingly, we can see that the First Marshal's Bodyguard are immediately going to sally out, covered by the Mirkwood archers as they continue to fire. I wouldn't really fire into the Orc fodder, especially not with the Argue Inanwaith. You can see that the Orc fodder very rapidly started to fall before the Mirkwood arrows, but I can't imagine they're going to react too well to a charge from the First Marshal's Bodyguard either. Although perhaps not the best of charges though, and they need to be careful because the Orc fodder are technically spears, so they may actually lose a few unit models here if they're not careful, and indeed they are, even though the Orc fodder are shaken. So the initial portion of this battle is going to be this one cavalry unit trying to get as many kills as they possibly can. Again, they had their swords out. I'm not sure whether he's actually targeting these units with a charge or whether he's just running into them. You definitely want to get the charge off, particularly on a multiple HP Lancer like this, because they have often got very high charge values, at least 15. A couple of them have got 20, but I don't believe the First Marshal's Bodyguard are such a one. But they've already lost a few unit models to both the Orc fodder and the Axemen, but at the very least, it's going to make the advance forward for the attackers that much more uncomfortable. You can see now that the Trolls are on the way. Now, Trolls can be skewered off the charge, And this is... Yeah, again, I don't think he's targeting the trolls with these charges because they're keeping their swords out as they charge in. They need to get out of there. The trolls are going to absolutely massacre them. The champions of the White Hand are on the way as well. Yeah, ultimately I feel as though this Cav micro has been quite poor from Roldolf's. I feel as though he definitely could have done a better job with his first Marshal's bodyguard, especially, you know, he's loitering around all of the units which are most dangerous to his cavalry. The champions of the White Hand and the Olag High are the things you would want to avoid at all costs, and now the champions of the White Hand are going to absolutely butcher this cavalry unit. I don't really know what he's hoping to accomplish here. He seems to very clumsily be bumping into all of the things which are most dangerous to him. Once again, not getting the charge off and going right into the front of those Morannon halberds. So yeah, definitely not a worthwhile endeavour this. I would assume a newer player, because that Cav play was pretty dreadful, if I'm honest. But even so, I mean, you know, he made life a little bit more difficult for the attackers to move forward on the advance, but the first Marshal's bodyguard is a fairly expensive unit of cavalry, and if you're the defenders, particularly when you're outnumbered like this, you can't really afford to waste a unit like that. They could have been exactly the sort of thing to help thin out the enemy numbers and give them a little bit of a leg up in the late game, but in the end, pretty much a complete waste, which is unfortunate. But now, the process of regrouping the attacking armies will begin. A little bit of a bombardment as well from the Troll Catapult. Isengard starting to move down, as are the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, but I think it's going to take them a little bit of time to get into position here. Even though it's still going to be a fairly difficult defense, I think mainly because of Mirkwood and their skill. You know, none of the Orc factions really can bring skillful units in great numbers, whereas the Elves often, that's their entire roster pretty much. And obviously accented with the Rohan AP. That's a pretty potent combination, especially seeing as the attackers seem to have gone, particularly Mordor and Isengard have gone for quite a lot of AP in their rosters, which may be not as cost efficient as they would want it to be. So there's a little bit of a lull here to the point where I think I'm going to actually make a little cut while the attackers decide to move forward. So now we have a little bit of movement. We can see that the Misty Mountains are getting ready to put up their siege towers down here, but also the fact that the walls are nearly destroyed, and now they have been destroyed. A little bit of trading of artillery fire going on here between the attackers and the defenders. You can see here that a few hits have also managed to hit into the infantry. Flaming shot coming in. But I'm actually, you know, a few pot shots from the Rohirrim catapult did manage to find their mark as well. You can see here that there's some crispy Sauron's Will on the floor, so that was a good catch. And again, you may as well, I mean, with all the surface area that the Orcs are covering, you can scarcely miss at this point. There's a lot of trolls that you can potentially try and hit as well. But you can now see that the Uruk-hai Reavers coming forward. There is now a gap in the wall that they can use. Also, the siege towers will be being set up. Ooh, that was a nice hit. Grazing the Helmingus, but also hitting the Thandrim Yeren just in behind. Now, this is where the defenders have to make their choice. Do they stand their ground? Or do they retreat? If they stand their ground, they will need to commit more resources down here to make it worth it. Some Hiri Peng back here as well. Looks like they're out of ammunition. I mean, they do have enough men down here to really make a good go of it, but I feel as though after the initial wave, which is made up of more basic units, also the Rohirrim player really needs to move some of these units off the wall because they're getting absolutely hammered by that Mordor catapult. You would prefer the Rohan troops to take the casualties than the Elven ones, but even so, as the defenders, you really need to preserve the lives of as many men as you possibly can. There goes the Elven Ballista, firing into the Isengard catapult, and the Ballista will be able to hit. You need to be a little bit careful here, the Isengard siege. Now that there are siege towers up here, you could get a fair amount of friendly fire as well. Here we go. The assault on the lower section of the fortress begins, as is customary on Helm's Deep, and it looks as though a decent mix here of the Rohan and Mirkwood troops are going to be picking up the slack. The Riddermark Axemen with their AP, but what are they actually going to be fighting? Uruk-hai Raiders? Yeah, that should be fine for them. Especially coming down here like this. Riddermark Axemen should be able to do a decent amount of damage, but I'm not sure how long they will be able to hold on their own if a consistent flow of units starts coming. Another unit of Uruk-hai Raiders attacking this unit of Riddermark Axemen as well. Classic rivalry between Rohan and Isengard. Legatus really needs to move his spearmen as well, because they're getting absolutely butchered by the Uruk-hai crossbows and the goblin archers. You can see already that several of them have fallen away. What's going on over there? Orc fodder routing. Heavy goblin infantry over here as well, but obviously they, in terms of quality, even worse actually than the Uruk-hai Raiders. So the Riddermark Axemen are going to have absolutely no issues butchering them. And then over here in the middle, you can see that some cave troll drummers keeping the morale up. But once again, heavy goblin infantry are going to be going into Mirkwood infantry, so that's probably not the best for them. Ooh, a nice shot there into the Rohan catapult as the Uruk-hai Raiders continue to try and get a foothold. Once again, you can see here that the Riddermark spearmen easily managing to hold off the Orc fodder, barely taking a loss, which is as to be expected. Oh, hello. The catapult actually killing off one of the ballista. So again, getting some really nice shots here, some nice angles that the Isengard catapult's been able to get up. Here though, you can see Uruk-hai Raiders actually routing, so the Riddermark Axemen really doing their job quite well. They have taken some losses, obviously. Two-handed axemen like this do tend to have lower defensive values and lower skill. So over a period of time, attrition will start to take its toll on this Rohan shock infantry. But they've done very well against the first wave of Uruk-hai Raiders, although those units will probably come back anyway. While over here, obviously, the elves are going to have no issues at all mopping up the heavy goblin infantry that comes their way. There's also some goblin infantry, just standard goblin infantry, but again, no problem for the elves whatsoever. Once again, you can see the Riddermark Axemen over here actually counter-attacking down the siege tower. This is not a good idea at all, because they are just going to get utterly overwhelmed. Again, I'm not really sure. I'm almost positive this is a misclick, because this is never going to be a good idea. Riddermark Axemen abandoning their advantageous defensive position to go down here into where the bulk of the goblins are, and not just trash goblins either. There's black uruks in close proximity. There's also trolls. Yeah, not a great idea, if we're being honest. There is actually a fight in the siege tower, though. But, you know, you don't often see a fight in the siege tower. More goblins pouring forth. Again, the artillery's still firing backwards and forwards, but I would definitely say the attackers have had the better of the artillery engagement so far. Their artillery has been really very useful indeed. Meanwhile, down here you can see Uruk-hai infantry being committed forwards, as well as some Uruk-hai reavers. There's also some heavy goblin spears as well. However, those Uruk-hai infantrymen are actually shaken already. The Riddermark spearmen and the Thandrimi Erin holding their ground very resolutely. The Helmingas getting into a good position to try and fire as well, as the banners of the White Hand and of the goblins start to try and push through, and they are really trying to push through to get to the ballista, which again, the defenders really need to be alert to this sort of thing, because it's very obvious when it's happening. Yeah, I don't think the defenders have really had the best of times of it so far. Hiri Lung are coming down the hill now as well, and they need to get in there. Again, I feel like this is... Again, I feel like I say this an awful lot, but if you're going to commit to a defence, you need to commit more resources than this. It's no good keeping stuff back in reserve if all you're going to do is get overwhelmed, and that's exactly what's happening to the defenders here. I've said it time and time again, and I feel like I need to say it again, because people don't seem to be learning, which is a real shame. You can see now the Hiri Lung just poking their heads out and getting immediately focused down by Uruk-hai crossbows. Still under a huge amount of artillery fire as well. Now the trolls, the White Hand going forward. The attackers smell blood here, and I don't blame them. The defenders have undermanned their positions, and they're being made to pay pretty dearly for it at this point. Hiri Peng are over here. The Westmark Spears are up here. Some Megil Erin. The Riddermark Axemen have been pushed right back by the Black Uruks of the mountains after that misclick. At least I assume it was a misclick. If it was intentional, then it was hugely ill-advised. Fire arrows coming in as well. But at this point the attackers are starting to force their way through. They're going to be able to start swarming the lower section of the wall in a moment. And with the Trolls of the White Hand there, this is not something they're going to be able to turn back now. They're going to try and patch things up with the Westmark Marshals, but that is not going to be sufficient, unfortunately, for them. Still the Helmingas shooting at basically point blank. Are they going to shoot? Or are they obstructed? There we go. Fire arrows coming in. There is some routing. Again, there is the possibility here, which the defenders are going to have to rely pretty much on the possibility of the attackers pushing too hard and making all their troops rout. Which in the face of the elves is possible, certainly, but now the snow trolls are coming forward, so obviously the attackers laying it all out on the line here. Westmark marshals are in there, but they're already shaken, looking like they might rout in the face of all these trolls, and now the goblins are just swarming forwards. Fire arrows also being arced into the attackers as they try and move forwards, but again, the wall actually held up fairly well, although with the Black Uruks on the side over there where the Riddermark Axemen mounted their foolhardy assault, I'm not sure whether that's going to be the case for much longer. The Hiri Lung Banser forces is evenly matched. The Uruk-hai infantry receiving some range support from the outside of the walls, but in a straight fight you would certainly expect the Hiri Lung to fairly easily beat the Uruk-hai infantry. There is some support coming forward now from the goblins though, and at this point the defensive lines are in tatters for the defenders. The Trolls of the White Hand have pushed their way through and are now going to work on the Helmingas. And again, if you're the attackers, this is another good takeaway. If you're the attackers and you see a gap, you see sort of an opening appearing, go for it with everything you've got. And oftentimes the defenders will not want to meet you for some reason. They'll want to be more conservative and keep their troops back in reserve, and you can make them pay for that. And that is exactly what the attackers are doing here. The Westmark infantry, the Westmark marshals actually. Victory is almost a certainty. I can't see how that's true with only 19 of them. There are tons of orcs. I mean, they are receiving some support from the Eowyn Shield Maidens, which again, the attackers are going to be taking some fairly hefty losses from doing this, but they will have saved an awful lot of time moving forward in this fashion. Snaga skirmishers from the Orcs of Misty Mountains moving forward, so some javelins from the attackers now as well. Uruk-hai infantry, obviously more elite units. The Thandrimi Erin are now depleted enough to the point where you would actually imagine that they're going to lose. There's also some goblin infantry coming up to give the Uruk-hai infantry a hand. This assault over here has also been underway for some time. The Uruk-hai pikemen moving forward, the Olag-hai coming forth, but over here the defenders had a lot more units in reserve that they could commit forward immediately. I'm not sure where these Westmark infantrymen are going. The Hiriyak are going forwards. But even so, this defensive line is still going to need more support. It's mostly made up of basic Rohirrim units, which are not as bad as people may think. Rohan's infantry can do a job for you. But here against Olag-hai and a ton of Uruk-hai pikemen, they are going to struggle. They're going to struggle quite a lot. The Westmark spearmen, they need to be committed forward as well. Again, there comes a time when you just need to understand that, you know, just keeping units back in reserve like this and going in wave by wave, he is putting them in now, thankfully, but it just doesn't work. I've never seen it work. It's never been cost effective, and I don't think it ever will be. Attrition is only going to favour the attackers in this situation when they've got so much in the way of numbers, particularly from 3 orc factions, so you don't want to be giving them that sort of engagement if you can help it. You want to be doing a lot of damage, a lot of morale damage as well, as quickly as you possibly can. It's a real mess down here. The Westmark spearmen did move up to try and help the Thandrimi Erin, but there's really not much of a resistance left down here in the lower section of the fortress. The attackers still have a fair amount of troops, but to be fair, they have committed an awful lot as well. Heavy goblin spears moving forwards. Eowyn's shield maidens are shaken, but obviously the attackers at this point are just going to clean up what's left of the defenders down here. There's a blob of infantry over here of Megil Yerin and Hiri Peng, just sort of hanging out. But they are also going to be hunted down by the trolls at this point. Meanwhile, looks like a few more elves have come over to try and help the beleaguered Rohan defenders over here, but as time passes, the attackers are slowly but surely pushing the defenders back more and more. A combination of Morannon halberds and Uruk-hai pikemen. Again, a lot of AP troops, which, you know, may not be the most cost effective, but they are doing damage, and Rohan in particular are struggling to sort of hold the lines. The Olag-hai are nearly dealt with at this point, but they've done a lot of damage. They've helped push the lines back. The question is, however, how many reserves, or how much in the way of reserves, do the attackers actually have? The Medusau Guard are waiting there. They would do an awful lot of damage with their javelins if they threw them in here. The trolls are firing, but they're not really going to get any hits here. Firing the rotten meat, which honestly is likely to be more of a problem for the orcs than the defenders. Even if the defenders do rout, they'll just go back to the town centre. Medusau Guard trying to get in position. Obviously down here, the ill-fated defence of the lower wall and fortress. Aeowyn and Shield Maidens are routing. The Westmark Spearmen are all alone at this point, having to deal with a slew of Uruk-hai infantry and javelins. I do like Rohan's style though. Obviously their new unit models in .97 also look very, very nice as well. Hiri Peng trying to do what damage they can. Fire ammunition. But again, the amount they're actually going to be able to accomplish is fairly limited. I mean, I'm surprised actually that the orcs down here have not decided to try and overwhelm these units over here. Still technically a unit of Riddermark Axemen, so the Black Uruks actually retreated back down the siege tower. It's just a few units of heavy goblin infantry as well, just hanging out. More heavy goblin spears moving up, so obviously moving to just completely overwhelm the small amount of Rohirrim foot soldiers that are still down here. 10,000 frames left, and obviously the defenders have had a really rough time of it thus far. We'll see. I mean, a lot of the attackers' units have been committed, and all of the best defending units are still left to be used. The Nanwaith units from Mirkwood, the Medusau Guard, the Warnberg Sentries, another unit of Westmark Marshals. There goes what's left of the catapult crew, trying to stop the certain inevitability about this advance so far. There's the Troll catapult crew coming forward. Again, they're going to be disrupting the defensive lines a fair amount, you would imagine. Here come the Westmark Marshals as well, trying to add a little bit more damage to the front lines, which will work. Mordor, Misty Mountains and Isengard all have all a little bit dependent on their armor values. The Westmark Marshals will carve right through that. Some Hiri Outh down here as well, trying to hold the lines. They need to be careful, of course. If the orcs so choose, they could go up here and then just bypass everything and go directly to the town centre. Although it is worth saying that there are some pretty nasty units waiting for them in there. What's going on down here? Well, the last of the Hiri Lang were finally defeated. Heavy Goblin Spears and Uruk-hai Pikemen getting ready to move forwards. What have we over here? This is a bit of a bizarre move from the attackers. These Snaga skirmishers, who are presumably out of ammunition, to be fair, but even so, they're not going to stand too much of a chance against Hiri Peng in melee. Ah, well, now the Uruk-hai crossbows are probably just going to shoot them. Still some Riddermark Axemen waiting, looming, but the lower fortress has now been pretty much entirely taken. Are these crossbows going to reload? Hiri Peng actually sort of using the Snaga as a human shield, or Snaga shields. And now you can see the troll drummers keeping all of their troops in line. The assault is going to start happening down here as well. The Medusau Guard are throwing their javelins into this blob, which again, very understandable, but now you can see the Black Legion are coming forward. And they're starting to push back against the defensive line over here. They're going to be taking a lot of damage though. Those javelins in particular. The Black Legion are not exactly the strongest unit in terms of getting kills. Really, their whole reason for being is just pushing units. There are a lot of them here. Orc fodder routing. That's a pretty big rout as well. The javelins taking their toll, but you can see here the Black Legion doing what they do best. They need to be careful though. They could push too far, and they could push too far away from their support, and then they would just get destroyed with consummate ease by the elves in particular. Yeah, a lot of these orc units are shaken at this point. Medusau Guard are here. Now they're charging into melee, which, again, the Medusau Guard are matched for pretty much anything the attackers have except the Nazgul and Temple Executioners. With those shields and battle axes, but the Black Legion's certainly doing a good job here, just barging the enemy out the way, potentially offering a path through the defences. This front line over here is likely to hold for a little while yet. The orcs may very well try and push through here as well, but without the Black Legion they will struggle a little bit more to do that. And of course the elves will be able to get a lot of kills on them as this happens. But again, it might be a good idea to send this Hiri Lung in now, before this situation gets out of hand. There's still a fairly long way to go in this battle, all things considered. Medusau Guard defeat seems certain. Black Legion are now shaken and winded. A rout from the Black Legion would be fairly disastrous here, but you can see that the attackers coordinating themselves very well. Once again, the defenders leaving themselves a little bit short of manpower on the front line. You know, any reinforcements they had were just a little bit too far away. As soon as you see the Black Legion come forward, you need to be prepared to charge in there and stifle them as best you can. And unfortunately, it doesn't look as though the defenders have really had their finger on the pulse with that sort of thing throughout this entire fight. Again, this is the sort of really aggressive pushing that the attackers have been engaging in. This whole battle can be incredibly costly if you play your cards right as the defenders. If you sort of set up some really strong defensive positions, you know, the attackers can live to regret this sort of plan. But unfortunately, so far, the defenders haven't really been able to do tons and tons of damage. Some Uruk-hai raiders that did come back from routing. A few of these Westmark spearmen and infantry, which were sort of left behind after the main push went past them, now going to have to battle the stragglers, Orc Javelins, Sauron's Will, some Uruk-hai raiders as well. The Medusau Guard right here in the heart of things. Just tons of goblins swarming forwards. I think the time is now for the defenders. They need to just commit everything forwards, because again, they're trying to set up another defensive line, but this has failed twice already. So, you know, do you really expect it to work now? Thankfully, the Elven player, at the very least, is committing forward some men. The Athalion Nanwaith come forward. A very, very strong unit indeed. I would still not believe this is enough, however. Again, the Athalion Nanwaith are moving forward, which again, this is a real shame. At this point, if you're the defenders, if you lose all of this, you're not going to be able to hold the town centre with what you have left. It's one of my real pet peeves that never seems to go away with this game. Sort of people trying to sort of set up these layered defences, because it never ever works when you're facing off against particularly when the orcs are being this aggressive. You know, it's like their dream. This defensive setup is exactly the sort of thing the orcs would want to see in this situation, because they can just band together in one big clump and smash your weedy defensive positions apart one by one. Now the Hornburg sentries are coming forward, but not before the defenders have already taken so many losses as is. What's left of the Rohan resistance down here also been defeated. Advantage of that, yeah. This is an incredibly one-sided fight. I can foresee a ton of dislikes, especially seeing as it's one-sided in favour of the orcs, but I will say that this has nothing to do with the overall strength of the factions. This has everything really to do with how the defenders decided to approach this, and also how the attackers decided to approach it. Because the defenders, considering they should really have seen what the attackers were doing, the defenders did everything wrong, I have to say. There was very little that they ended up doing right, and that's a shame, but that's the way it goes sometimes. The elves trying their best to hold the line, the Aradirith sort of trying to fire at point blank, the Hornburg sentries trying to hold the line. Just this river of orcs that keep moving forward. The attack shows no signs of slowing down. The second unit of Black Legion of Barad-dûr coming forward as well, which as soon as they make it to the front line, it'll be time to go again. At this point, I don't think the defenders have got enough manpower left to halt a shield wall push, even if they did commit everything they had. Unfortunate. That's the way it goes sometimes. Uruk-hai crossbows getting up on the wall in the ideal position as well. I've seen several times in the past on Helm's Deep crossbows get up on this wall and start attacking the defenders. Getting into a very nice position here as well. To be fair, the attackers have committed basically everything. There's a few stragglers of units still waiting outside the walls. A lot of them that have returned from routing as well, like those Uruk-hai raiders that are just sort of spread across the landscape. But for the most part, the attackers have had to commit everything to accomplish this. But it is the simplest of strategies really when you're playing as the Orcs. Just move forward with all of your might. And the defenders were just so unprepared for this sort of thing. Really the tone of the battle was set early on when that cavalry was misused. When it didn't really get any charges at all off, it just started bumping into all of the most dangerous anti-cavalry units. Oleg High, champions of the White Hand, just sort of ambling in front onto Moran on halberds. It was a real disaster, and that kind of set the scene for things to come, I suppose. I do have another fight on Helm's Deep though, so perhaps we'll see the defenders do a little bit better on the next one. Still the attackers push forward. I mean, there's only 4,000 frames left to go. And again, you can see here how elite units can have an effect. If you can imagine if these Hornburg sentries, Athalion, Nanwaith, and even the Aradirith had come forward back when the defensive line was down here, and they sorely needed reinforcements, if they had been committed then, the defenders would have been able to try and hold the line a lot more effectively than they have now. But unfortunately, again, I will say it until I'm blue in the face. Don't try and make a layered defense like this. It will not work. Especially against Orcs that are being really aggressive like this, because each one of your individual layers will not be strong enough to stop them, and you will inflict minimal casualties on them. Or at least casualties that the Orcs can easily absorb. That's the main strength of playing as the Orcs, the fact that you've got sort of so much in the way of disposable numbers that you can afford to be this aggressive and succeed. In terms of overall quality, the defenders had the tools they needed to make life a lot more difficult for the attackers here. You know, especially from a Mirkwood standpoint. Mirkwood have got so much in the way of skillful infantry that the Orcs really would have struggled against. You know, like heavy goblin infantry, Uruk-hai raiders, they would have just been, you know, Mirkwood infantry lays them to waste. But only if they're sort of backed up sufficiently. And unfortunately the defenders were just too divided here. Still the Orcs pushing ever further forwards. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Here come the White Uruk Fearmongers as well. No rest for the weary. The crossbow bolts coming in. The Nazgul are on the front line, who have taken some damage, which is unsurprising considering they have been up against some fairly strong units. I think that this battle will probably actually take place in the new year, because I don't really want to round out the year on a battle which is this one-sided, if I can help it. Not only because the Orcs are winning and that people will downvote me into oblivion. I will still show this though, because this acts as pretty much the perfect warning of what not to do if you're the defenders. Please do not layer your defences. Otherwise you will suffer the fate of Legatus and, what was his name? Hroldolf. And a grisly fate it is too. 7 Helmingars, unfortunately, are not going to be sufficient to stop this, the very slow and inevitable push forward from the Orcs here.
Our ally lies dead, slain by the enemy. We must help his men avenge him.
Well, there goes Thranduil. He was in there somewhere. Probably wishing he didn't come to help the men of the Mark after all. Goblin archers. Oh no, there's Thranduil. My mistake, it was Theoden that died. Well, there is Thranduil. He's not going to last much longer in there anyway. Surrounded by goblins and berserkers. Fire arrows at point blank. What is this? Some Black Legion? Nope, there isn't anything left back down here. The champions of the White Hand fancy a slice of the action as well. The one unit that was really waiting outside the walls after their work was done, when the one Rohirrim cavalry unit was easily dispatched. Halberds and spearmen just pushing their way forwards. I've been impressed actually with how the attackers have been able to keep up the same pace throughout this entire battle. Just been able to slowly but surely crush their way forwards. And again, as I've said, the defenders certainly helped them out with how they decided to set themselves up, but even so, I think the attackers do still deserve a good deal of credit for how they coordinated themselves, because they all moved in tandem very, very well. There goes Thranduil. Temple Executioners and Berserkers. To be fair to him, he was up against some pretty strong opposition before he fell. Are the champions of the White Hand trying to get through? I think they are, but they're having to sort of wait their turn. There's a big queue to get in. And there really isn't much left. I mean, there's some Hiri Lung and Hiri Peng, and that's just about it. A few Hiri Ek as well. This is surely going to be the end. Very, very shortly. So yes, this is a cautionary tale with which to greet 2019. This is not the way to go about a defense, particularly against a very numbers heavy Orc alliance. Layers don't work. If they're going to combine all their armies and sort of move forward in one big blob, you've got to fight fire with fire. And with stuff like Medusel Guard and Eowyn's Shield Maidens and all of those Mirkwood Archers, they could have made the attackers pay very dearly for this. And in the end, they didn't want her. Okay, so we've got Champions of the White Hand phasing through the wall. I guess there are so many Orcs that they're just getting like pushed through the level geometry at this point. Should also go some way to explain why the Black Legion of Barad-dûr have appeared on top of the wall. Still, I think this is going to be it. Is there going to be an admit defeat? I think there will be, because based on the amount of frames left, that's not going to be enough frames to kill off these Mirkwood troops. Trying their best, but ultimately not going to be enough. And there we go. The replay is finished. We're not even going to be able to see the kills on this one, so this was bit of a weird one, but still, picture this one as a cautionary tale. Do not set up your defences like the defenders did here, because particularly if the attackers have got very numbers heavy armies, they're going to be able to punish you for it. And obviously I've said time and time again, but this is probably the best example of how it doesn't work. This is what will happen if you're facing off against attackers that know how to exploit a layered defense, particularly if you're being very conservative as the defenders, like, oh, I want to save my most elite troops for some sort of epic final stand. That's not going to work. You need to be a little bit more concise with it. If you're going to try and do that, then make a strong defense on the outer walls and then bring everything back for the final stand. Don't try and like put up a fight in the middle, because then you're stretching your resources too thin. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this for what it was. Certainly more of an educational tool than a sort of cinematic battle experience. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.